This has been a long time coming. I have been doing research and reading the Old Testament, and of course, like I've said, I found proof, that the Bible God is evil. So this will be, again, part 3 or 4 of exposing the Old Testament. And I'm going to be starting off in the book of Genesis. This will be strictly only the King James Version Bible and not other version Bibles, because this is the one that I'm focusing on. So I'm going to be, if you can get your Bibles, I will be reading from Genesis chapter 9, verse 11, and I will be exposing the evil of God based on the Bible itself. Not saying based on real life, not saying based on the news, even though there's proof there. This will be mostly about, the Bible. His sacrifice, both human and animal, and how he turns around and requires murder and blood and animal, human sacrifice, slavery, stealing land from other nations and countries, and enslaving multitudes of humans, and even killing off children and babies. And I will be quoting scripture for you yourself to read. So please do get your King James Bible out if you have a King James Version Bible, or an international or New International Version. That you could use that too, because it says something similar, but the old King James Version Bible is older English. So in Genesis chapter 9, verse 11, "And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there be any more be a flood to destroy the earth." So that was God's idea. He was thinking, I won't destroy the earth with a flood again, but he has over and over and over again. So his promise was incoherent. He broke his own promise. He broke his own promise to his own chosen people many, many, many times. So that's a perfect example, as he says he's going to cut off, to stop drowning the world with water, but yet it still is happening all the time with floods and all of these things. With some things, I will be getting into it a little bit deeper, and some things I might not, because I'm not trying to read the whole entire Bible about why God did this and why God did that. It's a morality thing. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to, I'm going to get a little bit more in detail, so I am going to make more explanation or read exactly what the Bible is saying from here. So now we are going to turn to Genesis chapter 19, verse 32 through 38. Genesis 19:32. "Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, and that we may preserve the seed of our father." These are the sins of Lot's daughters. Lot was one of God's favorite prophets. Lot was an incestuous man who had sex with his daughters. And God preserved his seed and thought it was, and saved Lot, even though he did wickedness. Then God destroyed the rest of the area where Lot was dwelling and killed everybody else, because he favored the evil that Lot and his incestuous family were doing. He actually favored it and loved the evil wickedness that they were committing upon with their father. And how do I know? Go back to verse 30 in Genesis chapter 19, verse 30, the sin of Lot's daughters. "And Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters with him. For he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth." Meaning they couldn't find any other man to have sex with. Verse 32, "Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the seed of our father." 33, And they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and laid with her father, and he perceived not when she laid down, nor when she arose. So they got their father drunk, and he didn't know what was going on, whether they were waking up or rising up, or if they were still asleep. He was drunk and he was asleep, so he had no idea what was going on. And verse 35, and they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he perceived not when she lay down, nor when she arose. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father, and the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. So the father of the Moabites tribe of Israel is created from incest. Daughters fucking their own father. And God preserved and saved that seed. So the Moabites came from incest, and God allowed it in the Old Testament. Now I'm going to be reading something else. If you go to Genesis chapter 22, verse 2, the sacrifice of Isaac and Abraham. So, Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. So God tempted Abraham, and they say Satan tempts people. But it says, God tempted Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. So God is telling basically for him to kill and sacrifice his son, so that God tempted Abraham to kill his son Isaac. Now, even if he wasn't going to do it, and even if God told him to stop, the point of the morality is that God deceived him into believing that he was going to have to kill his son for God, and that is a deception, and that's evil, just the intention or just the idea that God had for any human to sacrifice anybody is immoral. And that's just a perfect example of why the God of the Old Testament is he's not perfect like people believe he is. But I'm the only one that truly cares to research and to study and to know about the 12 tribes of Israel, to know about the sins, to know about all these things. I'm the only white person in my family that cares to do research, that cares to know, that cares to understand, that cares to see the deception and to try to discern truth from deception. And these are one of these things where God deceives, and there is many scriptures in the Bible where he does deceive. In verse 3 it says, And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass, which was a donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering. He was setting up the wood. Then rose up and went into the place of which God had told him, the Mount of Moriah, the mountain. Then on the 3rd day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here, which means stay here, with the ass, with the donkey, and I, the lad, will go yonder and worship and come again to you. The word lad was an old Irish term. Just to keep that in mind, the word lad is used by the Irish to mean man or boy. In verse 6, And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, My father? And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. So he didn't even believe in his own mind that God was telling him to sacrifice his son. He was in denial. He was thinking that God was too perfect to want that sacrifice, so he assumed that it was going to be a lamb or some other animal. So he was being deceived by God. He was being tricked by God, thinking that he had to sacrifice his son, but then he was confused in his mind and deciding to get an animal to sacrifice to God instead. So his mind is being played with by God. He's being tricked. And so he laid his son upon the altar of the wood, came to the place which God had told him of in verse 9. Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order and trapped his son Isaac, laid him on the altar and the wood. Verse 10, and Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slay and kill his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. So I guess he knew in his heart, possibly, that maybe he didn't have to sacrifice his son, but he was getting confused by God at the same time. So he was assuming, that he was going to sacrifice an animal, even though God was telling him he was to sacrifice your son. Then all of a sudden, an animal appears behind him right when he's about to kill his son. So the deception, the playing with the mind, it's really deep. So, of course, I'm not going to read the entire chapter, because then it would go back further and you would have to read the entire Bible to know exactly everything that's happening. But I'm trying to read certain verses and certain chapters around the verse to try to get more in detail of what's really going on. And so I'm not just reading one verse and putting it out of context. I'm going to put it into and out of context, in and out of the box. So if we turn to the book of Exodus, chapter 10, verse 1. This is about the plague of locusts, but I'm just going to read the verse 1. Chapter 10, verse 1. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart, and the heart of his servants, that I might show these signs before him. So God hardened Pharaoh's heart to not listen or obey God. So God on purpose hardened Pharaoh's heart to disobey him. And thou mayest tell thy ears of thy son and thy son's sons what things I have brought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that ye may know that I am the Lord. If you look up the definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, or in the definition of the Lord, means Baal, the god of sacrifice. So God is actually the God of sacrifice. Baal, that you call Jehovah, that you call Yahweh, that you call Yahuwah. Yahweh is the... So, of course, God on purpose hardened Pharaoh's heart just so he could send the plagues of Egypt and kill innocent people and destroy and take over Egypt and their land, just because he decided to harden Pharaoh's heart on purpose, which the Bible talks about. And now in Exodus chapter 10, verse 25 and 26. 25. And Moses said, Thou must give us also sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord our God. Verse 26. Our cattle also shall go with us, there shall not be a hoof left behind them, for thereof must we take to serve the Lord our God, and we know not with what we must serve. So God did ask for human and animal sacrifices, and this is just the beginning. The God of Israel was jealous of the God of Egypt, and was angry because the Egyptians were worshiping their own God, which was the God that created them, their own Egyptian sun god. The God of Israel was jealous and angry because he's a jealous war god, and he's the only one that wants to be worshipped. He doesn't want any other gods to be worshipped, even if those human beings came from a different god. So he thinks that all humans belong to him, even if the Egyptians have their own Egyptian god, which they have every right to worship their own god, and it should not be taken away because of a jealous, vengeful God full of hate. Now I'm going to be reading a piece of scripture from Leviticus. I have the King James Bible with me right now. In Leviticus chapter 25, verse 44, I'm going to be reading about God enslaving innocent people and becoming slaves. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 44. Both thy bondman and thy bondsmaid, bondman means slave, basically. Which thou shalt have, which you will have, which the Jews killed for, shall be of the heathen. Heathen is a term for not only anybody that wasn't Jew, Muslim, or Christian, but heathen was a very specific and holy religion of earth that was sacred back a long time ago, before it was destroyed and desanctified, before the scriptures of my ancestors, my European ancestors, were burned, and before we also went into slavery. It wasn't only the black people that went into slavery, it's very specific bloodlines of people that had their land taken over, including Europe, that's happening at this very moment, which I will be making a different video about. So, in verse 44, but both thy bondmen and thy bondsmaids which thou shalt have shall be of the heathen that are round about you. Of them shall you buy your bondman and your bondsmaid. Verse 45, moreover of the children of the strangers that sojourn among you, children of the strangers among the Jews, which means anybody that's in their land, anybody that's journeying, going across the land to go somewhere else. Sojourn means walking, going from one place to another like a nomad. So anyone that's walking from one place to or another in their land, or even near them, or among any Jew, of them you shall buy, of their families, and that are with you. So you can buy their entire families, which they begat in your land. If they begat, means you have children in their land also. So if these heathens, or these Europeans that happen to be of the heathen culture or religion, or anybody that was considered a heathen, which was against the Jewish God, was kept as slaves, and they weren't only kept as slaves, it gets much, much worse than that. You think that that's just, it gets much worse. So, and they shall be your possessions. Now in verse 46, and ye shall take them, turning the page, and you shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you. So they're taking entire families, even for the Jews' own children, to inherit them for a possession. So they're stealing innocent families and children to become like a possession, like a slave, a bondsman or a bondswoman for the children of Israel. Forever, it says, be your bondmen forever, but over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over one another. So the children of Israel, you cannot rule over another person of Israel if you're an Israelite. Now, if you go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 22, verse 28, it is about enslaving a female virgin and keeping her as a virgin slave and sacrifice. In verse 28, Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28, if a man find a damsel, which means woman, that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, which means married. So if a man finds a woman that is a virgin that's not married, and lays a hold of her, and lies with her, and if they be found, if they're found having sex, then the man that lays with her shall give unto the woman to the woman's father 50 shekels of silver, which means the man is paying the woman's father 50 shekels of silver, paying him to have sex with her. And she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her. How is that humbling? He may not put her away all his days. In verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt. Well, of course, that's morality, but they're basically saying you can buy any woman you want after you have sex with a virgin. If she's a virgin, yeah, you can buy her. Just like that, just buy a woman. Buying people is not moral, it's not correct. You can't buy a human being, but this God of Israel thinks he could just buy people for his own people as slaves, as, virgin slaves for sex, and force them into marriage, which they talk about. Now, if you go to the book of Numbers, chapter 30, verse 17, we're going to get into God killing innocent children. Now, verse 17, now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by laying with him. So every child, of course it gets a lot deeper into the story, and there's reasons why God chooses to do this, but the fact of the matter is, no children, no matter what race or color, should ever be killed. I don't care what religion, I don't care if you're Muslim or Jew, it's evil, it's wicked, it's wrong. No children should ever be killed for any reason. I don't care if they come from a terrorist family, if the parents are terrorists. I don't care if they're crazy jihadists, with swords. The children should not be brought into that kind of evil and deception of religion, intolerance, and wickedness to slay another person or to bring any child into that deception or into that evil. But this is God. God is commanding Israel and certain people, and it's called the purification of those who are killed. So he's calling it purification by killing innocent children because of something else. Now, if we go, it's called the killing of the Midianites. The Midianites God hated. The Syrians, the Palestinians, God hated. The heathens, which were the Germans, God hated. God is so racist in this book. People do not see it. They're blind, because they're blinded by their own man-made doctrines and faith of the churches. And whatever the preacher says, they believe it. Whatever the preacher's opinion is about God, they think it automatically resembles to the Bible. Now, we're going to get deeper into this and the reason why he's choosing to kill these innocent people. We're going to start off in Numbers chapter 31, going back to read about it. Numbers chapter 31, verse 1. The killing of the Midianites. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites. Afterward shalt thou be gathered unto thy people. So after the Israelites kill the Midianites, they're going to go back to their own people. That's basically what he's saying in Old English. In verse 3, and Moses spoke unto the people, saying, arm some of yourselves into the war, and let them go against the Midianites, and avenge the Lord of Midian. Of every tribe 1,000, throughout all the tribes of Israel, shall ye send to the war. So there were delivered out of the thousands of Israel 1,000 of every tribe, 12,000 armed for war. So 12,000 people from the 12 tribes of Israel, 1,000 from each tribe, are going into war to kill innocent people and enslave people, basically. And in verse 6, and Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 of every tribe, them and the Phinehas and the son of Eleazar, the priest, to the war, with the holy instruments and the trumpets to blow in his hand. And they warred against the Midianites, as the Lord commanded Moses, and they slew all the males. They killed all the males of the Midianites. They're, changing the words to make it sound holy. Oh yeah, we're going to change the word murder to slew, so it doesn't sound as bad. And that's what they're doing. That's why it's infiltrating people's minds, because of the changing of the words to make it sound less evil. And they slew, I'm just going to put the word slew as murdered, and they murdered the kings of the Midian, beside the rest of them that were slain, namely Evi, and Rechem, and Zur, and Hur, and Reba, 5 kings of Midian, Balaam also the son of Beor, they killed with the sword. And the children of Israel took all the women of Midian captives, and their little ones, which means their children, and took the spoil of their cattle, stealing their cattle's food, and all their flocks and all their goods. That was in verse 9. Verse 10, and they burned down all their cities wherein they dwelt, and all their goodly castles with fire. So they have slayed and killed the Midianite women's little children, and killed the men, then burned their cities wherein they dwelt, and all of their castles with fire, taking down the whole kingdom. And verse 11, and they took all the spoil, basically stole all their items, stole their spoil, which means their items, the things that they own. That's what spoil is. And both of men and the beasts. So they even stole some of the men and beasts to keep as slave. slaves and sacrifices for God, because they sacrificed people and animals for the God of Israel. And in verse 12, and they brought the captives and the prey and the spoil unto Moses. So they brought the captives, the prey, which is the animals, the spoil, which is all the shit they stole, and gave it to Moses. And Eleazar the priest, and unto the congregation of the children of Israel, unto the camp of the plains of Moab, which are by Jordan near Jericho. So they're going back to their tribe of Judah, which is the Jordan area, or also the area of Jericho. Now this is, if you think this is holy, this isn't holy. To kill anyone is not holy. I don't care what race or land they come from. Nobody should kill anybody. It's wrong. Period, point blank. Now we're going to go into verse 13, purification of those who were killed. And Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the princes of the congregation went forth to meet them without the camp. And Moses was with them, the officers of the hosts, with the captains over several thousand, and captains over hundreds, which came from the battle. And verse 15, and Moses said unto them, have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Verse 17, now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath ever laid or slept with a man. Any woman who wasn't a virgin was killed off, and their children were killed off. Murdered. There's nothing holy about that. But yet people, almost half the world worships this God. And everyone marveled and bowed down to the beast. I'm going to show you in a way this God of Israel could be, possibly, the beast himself. The one of murder, the one of hate, the one of slavery, the one of genocide, the one who has murdered countless of millions of children, innocent babies, and innocent lives because of a certain bloodline or a certain thing that the parents did because they worshipped their own gods, and they had their own religion, and they had their own incense. And everybody should have the right to worship their own God from their own bloodline. I'm European, I'm not Jewish. I have, there's different gods that could have helped to create me that I don't even know about, because my whole family worships the God of Israel, as sad as it is. I'm the only one that's standing up against this evil and making a video about this. It's wickedness. I mean, here it is. If you guys don't believe me, okay, where is it? I can't really see exactly how to do this. Here is the verse about killing the innocent children and babies. I'm not sure how to get that clear enough for you to see, but it literally says, now therefore kill every male among the little ones and every woman that has had sex with a man. But all of the women that are virgins keep for yourself. So they kept all the women virgins for themselves, stole them after killing their husbands and children of other women, stole the ones who are virgins that didn't know a man, and took all their items, took their possessions, destroyed their cities, destroyed their castles, just because they had a different god, or just because they might have accidentally brought a disease, or whatever. It doesn't matter. And in verse 19, then he tells his own people to purify themselves after the murder. In verse 19, and do you abide without the camp for 7 days, so stay out of the camp for 7 days, whosoever hath killed any person, and whosoever hath touched any slain, which means dead person, slain, those who are killed, purify both yourselves and your captives that you took on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And purify all of your raiments, which means your clothes. They're trying to make it sound all holy. Oh yeah, raiments. And all that is made of skin, and all work of goat's hair, and all things made of wood. And verse 21, and Eleazar the priest said unto the men of war which went into the battle, this is the ordinance of the law which the Lord commanded Moses. Verse 22, only the gold and the silver, the brass, the iron, the tin, and the lead, everything that may abide in the fire, you shall make it through the fire, and it shall be clean. Nevertheless, it shall be purified with the water of separation, and all that abideth not in the fire you shall make go through the water. And you shall wash your clothes on the 7th day, and ye shall be clean, and afterward you shall come into the camp. So they're putting all of their brass, their metal, everything in fire to purify their weapons after they murdered and slayed thousands and thousands of people. Now they're going to purify it in fire and water and wash their clothes of the blood of the murder that God himself commanded. Now I'm going to skip some verses because I'm not trying to read the whole dang thing because it just gets worse and worse and worse and it gets more evil and more twisted from there. I'm going to jump to verse 31, going down. And Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. And the booty, which is the items, being the rest of the prey, which are the animals, which the men of war had caught, was 600,000 and 70,000 and 5,000 sheep. Thousands and thousands of animals that they stole from these people after they killed them off, and 612,000 heaves, and 1,000 asses, and 32,000 persons in all of women that had not known man by lying with him. And the half which was the portion of them that went out to war was in number 300,000 and 37,500 sheep. And the Lord tributed of the sheep was 6,315, and the beeves were okay. It's just going to keep on getting into huge, huge numbers of animals that they killed and people that were slain, and it's really, really bad. And now we're going to go into Deuteronomy in verse, I'm just going to read verse 15 and 16. Of course, it's the next book over. And again, God gets angry because of the worship of other different gods that the heathens and other people were worshiping, and him being a jealous god of war. This is what he does. Because they worship and offer incense to another god, which talks about it in chapter 13 all the way down from verse 1 all the way down the whole entire chapter 13 of Deuteronomy. So look it up, because I'm not going to read the entire thing here. But thou shalt surely smite and kill the inhabitants of the city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly, and all that is within, even the cattle thereof, with the edge of the sword. Verse 16. And thou shalt gather all the spoil, all the items, all of the dead, into the midst of the street thereof, and shall burn the fire. They're misspelling everything here. They shall burn the city with fire, and all the spoil. They put, and shalt burn the fire of the city. So someone did an error in what they were trying to say. And their every whit for the Lord thy God, and it shall be a heap forever, and it shall never be built again. So he's telling them, burn down the city, take and gather your spoil. Now going into Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 28, going back to the slavery thing with women and virgins on a different book. If a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, a woman who's not married, again, 50 shekels of silver to sell the woman to become a wife to the man who had sex with her. Again, it talks about that. Now, going into the book of Joshua, going into verse 19 downward. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle, destroyed, killed in battle. Verse 20, for it was the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle. So God's the one that's hardening and twisting and corrupting the hearts of other people in other countries on purpose, just to fight his own people, to kill people off, because he likes to see people slain and die. That's basically what it says. Read this again. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly. That is in verse 20. And that they might have no favor, but that they might destroy them, as the Lord commanded Moses. And at that time Joshua and cut off the Anakims from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. There was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza and Gathin, and Ashdod there remained. So he killed all the children and destroyed the land of Israel. God himself destroyed his own people in his own land, using other people after his own people were killing other people. So he's creating war on purpose, just to test people's faith, to force people into worshiping him, just because they're worshiping a different God and offering incense and even sacrifice to other gods as well. Two wrongs don't make a right. Two evils don't solve a problem, but the God of Israel thinks so. He thinks war and destruction is the answer. That's the problem. And going into verse 6, them did Moses the servant of the Lord and the children of Israel killed. And Moses the servant of the Lord gave it for a possession into the Reubenites. So the Reubenites were blessed, and the Gadites, and the half of the tribe of Manasseh. And there are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel killed, and on the side of Jordan on the west, from Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon, even unto the mountain of Halak, that goeth all the way to Seir. So again, they're talking about killing entire families, often children, in the book of Joshua. Of course, they switch around the words to make it sound more holy. They switch around the words. They change the word murder and put the word smite, and so on and so forth, so that people don't pay attention to the actual gist of what's really happening and going on. It's the part of the deception in the Bible to make murder seem like it's good just because God says so. So they switch around the words and make it like Old English so that people will believe it better. Now we're going to jump into 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 11, going on down. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them unto your neighbor, and he shall lie and have sex with your wives in the sight of the sun. And the sun is the sun god, which is the god of Egypt, which he hated. The God of Israel hated the God of Egypt and tried to kill off the Egyptians or if they didn't worship him. But he's the one that hardened the Egyptians' hearts in the first place, so they couldn't physically or spiritually worship the God of Israel. So he did it on purpose, just because he wanted people dead. So that makes him even worse. And verse 12, For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all of Israel and before the sun. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, The Lord has also put away your own sin, that you shall not die. So all of a sudden, God's given him life, even though he had sex in the sun, and God sees it as a sin, and God is the one that's behind it all, and it even talks about it in the Bible right here, but people have to understand what they're reading. Because people will go through this and read it and not even think about it, or not even think about what's going on, or putting any understanding into it. And David said unto Nathan, you shall not die. Verse 14, How about because by your deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blasphemy? The child also that is born, he shall surely die. So he kills an unborn child, God does. After God is the one that tempted his prophet in the first place. If you go back and read the rest of chapter 12 from verse 1 all the way down, God is the one that tempted his own prophet to sin in the first place before killing his baby in the womb of the mother he had sex with. So he killed an innocent fetus. And he's the one that's planning all of this evil and forcing all of these things to happen, and then expecting people to repent anyways. And in verse 15. And Nathan departed into the house, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore unto David, and the baby within her womb was very sick. David therefore besought God for the child. He came to God for the child, and David fasted. He fasted, and went in and laid all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. So he was laying down. He didn't even want to get up. He was so sad. He couldn't eat bread. And it came to pass on the 7th day that the child died, 7th day into pregnancy. And the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead. Or it might have been 7 days after the child was born, possibly. For they had said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spoke unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he vex himself? How will he vex if we tell him that the child is dead? But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto his servants, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. Then David arose from the earth, and washed and anointed himself, and changed his clothing, and came into the house of the Lord, and worshipped God anyway, and came into his house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he finally ate. Verse 21, Then his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Wilt thou fast and weeping for the child? So he was fasting, and he was crying for his child while it was alive. But when the child was dead, you didn't rise, and you didn't want to eat bread. And he said, While the child was alive, yet I fasted and wept, for I said, Who can tell whether the God will be gracious unto me? And in verse 23, But now he is dead, wherefore shall I fast? Can I bring him back again? Can I bring my dead child back alive again? I shall go to him, but he shall not ever return to me. And verse 24, And David comforted Bathsheba his wife, and went into her, and laid and had sex with her, and she bore a son, and called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved Solomon. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Jebediah, because of the Lord. This is only part 1. I only have a 43-minute timeline on this video. I'm going to have to delete some things to add more time to my videos so that I can make my videos longer, because I have a lot more to say. It gets way worse than that. That's just the beginning of the Bible. It gets into more sacrifice and more slavery, which I will be exposing and reading about. So, to the next video.